Now, with the release of the Clone Wars Season 7 a little over a week away, I thought it was a good time to discuss some of the things that makes the show so great. To briefly go over the top 5 reasons in no particular order, why it's some of the best Star Wars you're ever going to see anywhere, and why, if you're a huge Star Wars fan who's maybe hesitant about watching it, you should really consider at least giving it a shot. Though, if you are such a fan, do be warned that the Clone Wars movie, as well as the first 2 seasons, can be a bit rough around the edges at times. There's certainly still a lot of good in there, a lot to make them worth watching, but since the series is anthology style, meaning though there is a large overarching idea or story in place, which is obviously the Clone Wars, most of the stories, especially in the earlier seasons, are rather independent of each other. In other words, if you miss an episode here and there, or skip one that maybe you're just not getting into, you're likely not going to miss anything crucial or that will affect your understanding of a later episode, for the most part. In fact, there are plenty of lists out there that flat out tell you which are the important episodes and which you can freely skip without missing anything. Because in the later seasons, though it always remains anthology style, there is more interconnectivity between the stories, and so if I remember to, I'll put a link in the description below to one of these lists that let you know the important episodes to watch. Okay, enough preamble, let's get to it. The first reason the Clone Wars is so great is quite simply world building, and that might be a bit of a generic answer, and the next 4 will be a bit more specific, but there's no denying that the Clone Wars greatly expanded the lore of Star Wars, or what we know about the galaxy far, far away. It took us to dozens of new and unique worlds, presented us with entirely new concepts or aspects of the Force, let us better understand the political landscape of the era, and introduced us to many, many new great characters. Basically, it enhances our understanding of everything Star Wars, especially the prequel era. It fleshes out the galaxy in a way that, quite simply, a series of movies that are a little over 2 hours long each never ever could. I mean, if we include the upcoming Season 7, which is 12 episodes, there are a total of 133 episodes of The Clone Wars, not counting the movie. So if we do a little math and figure each episode is around 22 minutes long, and the movie was about an hour and a half, that means there's roughly 50 hours of The Clone Wars to watch, 50 hours of stories to be had, which is a little over 2 full days. And unlike a movie that has to keep a very tight, perfectly flowing narrative at all times, a series has the luxury or the time to slow down and explore things that movies never could. Plus, the Star Wars movies always need to be rather grandiose in scale. They always tend to tell the bigger stories, whereas a series can tell smaller stories that can not only be equally interesting, but again, can be given the time to develop at a slower, more natural pace, which allows us to get even more vested in the characters than we otherwise would. Which kind of leads me into my second reason why the Clone Wars is great. We get a lot more of Anakin and Obi-Wan together. We really get a chance to see them be brothers. After watching the Clone Wars animated series, that line from Obi-Wan in A New Hope about Anakin being a good friend makes a lot more sense, as does the subtle look or slight undertone of sadness or regret in his voice. Because in Episode 2, they're mostly at odds with each other. Plus, at that point, it's more of a father and rebellious son relationship that they have going on. And sure, the opening of Episode 3 does a really good job of showing how they've become more of a team, how they've more or less become equals and or brothers, but that's all we ever really get. The two are apart during the middle act of the film, and in the final act, well, they're not brothers anymore, or should I say they're brothers very much at odds with each other. And so in the Clone Wars series, we get a lot more of these two working together. It lets us see the relationship that I think we all imagined they'd have back before the prequels ever came out, and all we really knew about that time and the fall of Anakin was what we heard in the original trilogy said by Obi-Wan Kenobi. However, one thing that we didn't get, or that I think could have been done a bit better, is if they'd shown us how the two had become so close after the way they were in Attack of the Clones. It's a small complaint, but I do wish we'd seen a bit more building of the relationship in the first few seasons. In other words, there's no transition phase. If you watch Attack of the Clones and then start watching the Clone Wars, they suddenly are just best friends. And perhaps a case could be made that the original Tarkovsky Clone Wars series, which though terrific isn't considered canon, did a much better job of giving us an immediate post-Attack of the Clones story, but that's a topic for another time. And for now, let's move on to the third reason the Clone Wars series is great, which is the clones themselves. And going along with what I was saying before about just not having the time to really explore something in a movie, the clones, who they are as people or as characters, is all but ignored in the films, yet it is an integral part of the show. And sure, in episode 3 we get some interactions between Obi-Wan and Commander Cody, implying there is some level of rapport or friendship there. But when we get to the point when Cody receives Order 66 and doesn't hesitate to open fire on Kenobi, there's no emotional weight to that moment at all between those two characters. I mean, Order 66 itself does of course have an impact, simply because of what it means for the Jedi and the story, but in an odd sort of way if you haven't seen the Clone Wars to know all the clones have chips in their head and that makes them comply with Order 66, that moment undermines the setup between Obi-Wan and Cody before it, because there isn't even the slightest hesitation from Cody before he gives the order to fire. However, if you've seen the Clone Wars, you again know Cody was simply compelled to fire thanks to the chip in his head, that he was essentially programmed to do it, which makes you wonder how he felt later on, when if he came to his senses and realized what he had done. You also, thanks to the show, know just how close Obi-Wan and Cody actually were, as a lot of other Jedi were also close with their clones, the ones that served under them. Furthermore, in the show, we learn all the clones are different from each other. They all have slightly different personalities, traits, quirks, mannerisms, and so on, which, intended or not, is a bit of a commentary about how we are more than just the DNA or genes that make us up. There's something truly special about each and every one of us. In one episode, the first episode of the show in fact, Yoda even tells a group of clones that they are all unique in the Force, that he sees them all as individuals, and this gets heavily explored in the show. The idea that they are real people, vastly different from the mindless droid army they fight, yet in the end, sadly and almost ironically, they are turned into pretty much mindless droids when Order 66 is given and triggers the chips in their brains. And one final thing worth mentioning about the clones is we get to see their view on the war, what they think of it, why they fight, and why a handful of them choose not to fight, and why many of them grow weary as time goes on. We also again get to see how they interact with the Jedi and what they think of them. There's even a story arc, the Umbaran story arc, which shows how the clones handle a situation where they encounter a traitorous Jedi, and it's one of the best arcs of the entire show that I won't spoil anything about in case you've never seen it. Reason number 4 as to why the Clone Wars is great is Darth Maul, and I know if you're someone who indeed hasn't seen the show, you might roll your eyes at the idea of him surviving what happened in The Phantom Menace, and I know that because, well, when I first heard the show was bringing him back, I too rolled my eyes and thought, this is going to be ridiculous. But Clone Wars manages to turn what was essentially a cool looking character with an epic fight scene in Episode 1 into one of the best characters in all of Star Wars. And going just off what you see in Episode 1, you might wonder how that's even possible, since that film doesn't really portray the character to have any complexity. It basically paints him to be an enforcer of Darth Sidious's, one that you could never really see with the cunning and intelligence to be a rival to him, to one day take his place as the Master Sith. But in the Clone Wars we learn not only is he rather intelligent, not only does he build an army to conquer Mandalore with, but he wants to take vengeance on anyone and everyone who has ever wronged him, chief among those being Obi-Wan Kenobi. And even though getting to explore the character further is the highlight of him coming back, we also can't ignore the fact that he's part of some of the absolute best lightsaber fights in the show, including an upcoming one against Ahsoka Tano that Ray Park, the original actor, did motion capture work for, which we'll be seeing in Season 7 shortly enough. Though, if the little glimpse of it we've already gotten is an indicator, it looks like it's going to be incredible. And speaking of Ahsoka, she just so happens to be the number 5 reason on this list of things that makes the Clone Wars great, which is something I would have never believed roughly 11 years ago now, when I saw the Clone Wars movie for the first time, that not only would I not hate the character, but that she'd eventually be one of my favorite characters of all time. Because in that movie, she starts out extremely annoying, as a lot of young people who think they know everything and can do anything oftentimes are. But slowly over time, she begins to realize that maybe she doesn't know or understand quite as much as she thought she did, and after some trial and error and some mistakes, some of them big, she begins to garner true wisdom and grow as a person. And with Ahsoka, we get to watch this slowly happen right before our eyes over the course of 5 seasons. And considering this is a transition all of us have to go through, we all go from child to adult and have a lot to learn along the way, it makes a character very relatable when it's done right, which it is here. Because again, she doesn't always get things right, and even makes huge mistakes that, well, your average kid is never going to make, like when she's put in command of a bomber squadron in one episode, and she gets all the clones in the squadron killed. And so the character becomes a reminder to adults about just how hard life can be growing up, about how it can sometimes quickly bite you right in the ass, and how sometimes at that age, one bad thing feels like the end of the world. She's also a good example to younger viewers that, no, you're not always going to get everything right the first time, that maybe there is a lot yet to learn about life, and that it's oftentimes going to be a very difficult learning curve. Which, getting serious for just a moment, is important because I do think it's good for younger viewers to, at times, see characters that they truly can relate to, that face struggles that, though obviously different in some respects, might be in others very similar to something they're currently facing, and show them that perseverance and hard work can oftentimes be the key to overcoming the greatest of obstacles in life, and that other times you are going to lose no matter how hard you fight, and that responding to failure, picking yourself back up after it, will go a long way in defining the type of person you will become. Also, Ahsoka is just a flat-out well-written and interesting character. The fact that she started out unlikable, or at least I didn't like her, makes her transition into someone you really want to root for or care about all the better. It's always great to see a character grow and progress, and watching Ahsoka's journey from brash young Padawan to level-headed young adult who is ready and deserves to become a Jedi is easily one of the best things about the Clone Wars. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think makes the Clone Wars great, or if you disagree and think it's not all that great in the first place. Or tell me if you're someone who's never seen it, but perhaps I've now convinced you to give it a try. Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.